Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 188 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. In this episode, we are going to be putting the wraps on carbon fiber barrels. Some pros and cons, some things that we want to talk about, really why we use them and why we don't use them. Some things that are pros and cons that people don't talk about, and when you're trying to make a decision for a great shooting rifle. So it ought to be a great podcast. So without further ado, here we go. All right, before we get started, I want to say a quick thank you to Triggertech. Triggertech is the maker of fine rifle triggers. They're made for lots of different makes and models. They make single stage and two stage, really what I consider some of the safest triggers on the planet, as well as some of the finest triggers on the planet. Easy to install, easy to adjust. So if you want to upgrade your game and you want to do it with a trigger, stop over to Triggertech.com. That's Triggertech.com today. We'd also like to thank MDT. MDT is the maker of fine rifle chassis. They make a ton of makes and models. They really are turning out to be one of the largest manufacturers of chassis in the United States. And one of the reasons I like them is they're big enough that they can control their lead times. They make lots of different makes and models, from entry-level chassis like the Oryx, which we absolutely love, to the JAE 700, the ACC Elite, and just lots of really cool stuff in between, including some new varmint rigs that they came out with that we're excited to try to get some of our hands on. So if you want to shoot beyond 700 yards and you want to do it consistently, the rifle does have to fit you perfectly. And in order to do that, sometimes you really do have to swap out the factory stock to get something that actually fits your build and style of shooting. I think MDT is one of those companies to have a lot of choices and possibly more than likely something that will fit. So if you want to upgrade your shooting game in your rifle and you want to do it with a stock, you can stop over to mdttac.com. That's mdttac.com today. So this is a conversation that we have with customers here on a regular basis. So Adam is one of our product managers here. He is also heavily involved in production. We have conversations about shooting, rifles, builds, components all the time. He has been around this for quite a long time. And carbon fiber barrels are one of those things that when we talk to customers about it, we try to really just be open and honest. Like, what is our personal opinion on them and why or why not we would choose it for our own custom rifles. And I'm going to be pretty sincere on this podcast and tell you what my opinion is and why I would consider one and many reasons why I would not. So let's start back with a lot of misconceptions with carbon fiber. I think a lot of people, when they do carbon fiber, they believe it's a $5 upgrade, so it must be better. And I get it that you're trying to make hunting rifles with them, and it gives it that heavier barrel appearance, right? But I say in that a lot of times, with the exception of putting a suppressor on, it really is giving you a false sensation that it's more rigid, that it's better, that it's going to perform better. It has a cool factor to it, and we think that plays a lot into a lot of custom rifles that we build here. So we build a lot of rifles with carbon barrels. However, though, there's a lot of truth that needs to be talked about when it comes to purchasing a carbon barrel, right? A lot of the stuff that you'll see and read out there is based on opinion. Mine's probably in there as well. But, we spend the time to talk to the people that actually make them and people that are experts in the field. So we get sort of that door that we can crack open and get behind the scenes and actually hear the truth from the people that actually have to put their hands on them, do the testing and evaluation, and come up with what would be a good result or a good product that they can pass on to the customer. When I look at carbon fiber barrels, the first thing I always look at, and this is me now, is I always say that it's cosmetic. For me personally, the original carbon barrels, as well as they move forward with a lot of the stuff that you see out there, it's sort of wrapping something up in a pretty Christmas present wrap type thing and putting a bow on it, and it makes it look very appealing. But for me personally, it is aesthetics, and in some ways, I think a little, now please don't toast me on this one, maybe even a little gimmicky on how they use carbon and why. One of the things that before we started building on carbons years ago was our thoughts have always been, and I just spoke with one of the largest manufacturers of carbon barrels, custom, here in the United States yesterday. We had this conversation. The gentleman's been doing it for, 25, 30 years. He's been a shooter for longer. He's world-class bench rest. He is capable of shooting in the zeros and ones, right? And he's also heavily involved when it comes to making some of these high-end carbon barrels. And, we were having this conversation yesterday. And it's a conversation we have every day with customers. That's why I'm sort of trying to have this conversation here and say, look, I just want to share with you what we look at and why and how, and maybe just take some food for thought with it. So when we originally come up with our carbon barrels that we offered more than 10 years ago, it was a proof. We don't use proof anymore, and we haven't used them for years. But it was a proof, which, by the way, was made by Bartline Barrels, for those that don't know that. And one of the things when we approached proof is that we wanted the 338 contour under the carbon. A lot of times in my mind, they make that sleeve or that, I don't want to call it a sleeve, but when they machine down to just the thinnest part of the barrel where they're going to wrap it with carbon, they always take it too thin, right? Everybody's just trying to get to the lightest that they can get. And that's problem number one, is you lose all of that rigidity. Problem number two is you've lost all of that steel to absorb and dissipate heat, right? And then problem number three is you really introduce a lot of issues with everything from curvature to the bore. I mean, how do you control that now that you've made it so thin from walking around? Problem number four, what happens when the barrel warms up? Carbon fiber is an inert material. It doesn't expand. It doesn't grow like other materials do. Stainless steel and aluminum, if they get hot, they grow, they move. What happens to that steel inside as it's trying to expand and push the barrel in both directions, and the carbon is holding it in place? What's that steel look like underneath there? What is it doing to the barrel? Is it going to cause a point of impact shift if it gets overheated? And then also, it's going to wear out faster. We had this conversation yesterday with a gentleman who's been doing this longer than most of the people that I know. And he will tell you that if it's a straight up hunting rifle, you're just going to go out and put a couple rounds through it for hunting season, and it is a dedicated hunting rifle. It is not something you're going to take to the range and put some rounds downrange, goofing around the steel, shooting groups, doing load developments, putting a lot of rounds down through it. That should be a stainless barrel. That should be a steel barrel. He will tell you that all the time. And he will also share with you all the nightmares that they had trying to develop a carbon fiber barrel that actually shot okay. And what they've learned is the same thing that we're telling you now, is they had to make everything thicker. And really, in my mind, it's just putting a fancy bow and ribbon on top of a barrel to make it look different. And it's introducing potential disasters all over the place. So let's talk about carbon in detail, then we'll talk about the comparison with steel. It was always a fancier rifle. For me, we could probably Cerakote and make a carbon-ish looking or wrap a barrel, whatever we want to do. But, I think there's that little bit, a little pride, carbon fiber barrel. Ooh, it's, they're pretty looking. They really are. They're really eye-catching. So that's the first part, right, is the aesthetics of it. And they're more expensive. So there's a little bit more bragging rights with it that, hey, this is a premium barrel, right? But let's talk about the negative effects of carbon fiber barrel. The first misbelief when it comes to carbon is that it's more rigid than steel. That is not true. So you'll see that floated all the time, that it's more rigid than steel. The truth behind that is it can be more rigid of steel if it's of the same weight. That's the problem. So in order to get a carbon barrel to shoot or be as rigid as a steel barrel, like say, for example, like you take a Remington Varmint stainless barrel, and then you have a carbon barrel that looks very similar, but it's a Remington Varmint contour. In order to get the carbon barrel to be as rigid as the steel, it would actually have to weigh the same. And so you would have a 3 or 4 inch carbon barrel sleeve over top, and you would lose all the weight benefits. So the first thing that's always floated out there is that it's more rigid than steel, but the little asterisk that they always leave out is it can be, but it would have to be of the same weight. The second part is you hear people talk about it doesn't get as hot as fast or it dissipates heat. That's a false. That is not true. carbon does not conduct hot and cold, and the resins that they use doesn't help. So when we take a carbon fiber barrel, the steel underneath is super thin, right? What that carbon actually does is it gives a false impression that it's not heating up as fast or it's dissipating heat faster, simply because you shoot 5 rounds through it and you lay your hand on a carbon, it's not hot yet. You shoot 5 rounds through a steel barrel, it's hot already. It's hiding the heat from you. It takes longer for that heat to dissipate out. So if you came back 20 minutes from now and laid your hand on the carbon, then you probably feel that it's actually warm, where the steel is actually cooling off. So there's people that will argue this and try to upsell the benefits of the carbon, saying it dissipates heat, but that's not true. And speaking with a gentleman who had heavy hands in developing some of the first carbon barrels that were open to the market, he will tell you that the carbon hides the heat and it cooks the barrel faster. It cannot get rid of the heat. And because the barrel's thinner, where it's steel, it has to absorb all that extra heat in less material. So the thicker you make the barrel, the more material you have to absorb or sort of wick the heat away and absorb that temperature increase. But the thinner the barrel is, the less material you have to do that wicking effect, and the hotter it will get. And so when you take a carbon barrel and you dump 5 rounds through it, man alive, just the heat that poor barrel has to do in the thinnest portions is just unbelievable. So that's false number 2. The other part that I really sort of, if we wanted to throw some more stones at carbon, is the fact that can it walk, or is it going to stay extremely accurate when it gets hot? I think IBI does some of the better job of their taper lock system. It's almost like a barrel tensioner that sort of pulls on that steel, keeping it straight. They won't release on everything on how they do it. I'm only trying to draw it in my mind. I know how they attach the barrels, and I know some of the process in the taper lock, but my guess is that they're probably a little bit less prone to curvature to the bore or some heat walking away because of the almost like a barrel tensioner and that taper lock, but they can't get away from it. And so what's happening to that barrel when you machine all of that material away is that they always have the chance of opening the lands and grooves, the bore diameter, opening it up several, maybe 10,000ths. Now, it's probably hard to mic it, but you could air gauge it, or you could use lead slugs and push it down there. I mean, we find this with fluted barrels that if the heat treat and everything isn't done at the right process when they flute a barrel, they can actually open the bore up. And you can find this with a slug. So I have seen this with my own eyes. I have pushed slugs through barrels that have been fluted to where this lead slug that looks like a miniature, let's just say 243 bullet, right? It's all lubed up. You force it into the rifling and it's nice and tight. It's moving forward 4 or 5 inches. And all of a sudden it gets to the flutes and it just slips right through. Hardly no resistance at all. And then at the muzzle, it tightens up again. The same thing happens with carbon. It has to. You're removing that much more material. The only way I think you could get away from it is if you did the rifling after you removed all the material. But in my mind, that creates 2 problems, right? Number 1, it can certainly cause accuracy issues. You're just cracking that door. It's not saying it does or it doesn't. It cracks the door. The third part is it's not so much the shooting that destroys the barrel, but also if you have gases blowing by the bullet, basically getting in front of it. So if you picture the bore opening up a little bit, now the gases aren't plugged behind the bullet. They can actually start blowing by it. And hot gases moving like that, cut. So you're doubling down on basically the effective wear of the barrel, or shortening the barrel life tremendously, because you're allowing those hot, super heated, high pressure gases to sneak by the bullet and start working on your lands and grooves at high pressure, not just pushing the bullet, but now blowing by. So if you can picture almost like a hot jet gas, it's known that type of blowing by the bullet with those hot gases tends to wear down your barrel faster and destroy it faster. So that's just another issue or a feather that you can put in the hat of a stainless steel barrel or a chrome moly barrel that they just don't have. And if they're built right, they're not as vulnerable to it. The pro to the carbon, right, if it's done right, they're good looking for sure. I think one of the reasons why I do like them so much is that it allows us to put suppressors on. So we can thread the muzzle and have enough meat on the muzzle to put a 5/8 by 24 thread on it. So it allows us to make a little bit lighter barrel, but still run suppressors because we really are such big fans of suppressors around here. I really would hate to shoot without it. I mean, it's just for me, I don't even know if I would hunt in a state where I really couldn't use a suppressor on a regular basis. So there's maybe a pro to it. And they are really good looking. I mean, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. A carbon wrap barrel is super sharp when it's cleaned up and everything's put together properly. The last thing I want to talk about with carbon barrels before we move on to the stainless portion is the whip. We had a 22 Creedmoor out testing it last week, and I was half tempted to film it just to show people how much the barrels move and whip around. Like, you can do internet researches on carbon fiber barrels being shot with suppressors, but if you slow those videos down and you watch those barrels whipping around, like, it's stunning to me. Like, we know that that's not good, right? We know we want that barrel to be as rigid as possible. The gun's still shot. I mean, it shoots great. But the amount of whip that you get sometimes just amazes the daylights out of me. And because they're not as rigid as steel, it sort of exaggerates that. So you've got vibration and bouncing and all these other things going on after the shot that the rifle's trying to settle itself down. So if I had to say one more thing that would be in that column of things that you have to watch for with carbon barrels is you're always going to have more whip. And if you put a suppressor or something heavy on the end, it sort of exaggerates it a little bit. How we address carbon fiber barrels is we try to find the thickest. So our carbon barrels here are 1/250 at the shank. In other words, back where they would traditionally screw into the receiver. Now we attach our ace to it, but where it would traditionally screw into a receiver, it's not 1.1 inches, it's not 1.2 inches, it's 1.250. And that is 3 inches long. We try to keep that really thick portion of the steel close to the receiver to help control barrel whip and add rigidity as much as we can before it turns into the carbon. That also makes sure that when any rifle is chambered, in our case we're adding the chamber, but if you take a very short carbon barrel, let's just say, for example, a Bartline that has a 2-inch shank on it, well, they'll tell you, do not run a 338 reamer in there because you're going to go so far forward of the stainless steel shank where it's at full diameter, you're now getting into the thin portion of the steel under the carbon where you can't see. You can really create an unsafe rifle in a hurry. So for those that are out there chambering, and we've talked about this, we've seen it here at the shooting school over the years where guys have put calibers, inappropriate calibers, in too thin of barrels, and the reamer is actually going up into the thinnest portion of the barrel, still cutting, and that's where the pressure's at, right? So that's another thing you have to be really aware of, not just as a consumer, but more importantly as a builder. When we talk to customers about carbon and they want to upgrade to the carbon barrel, we do a lot of carbon barrels. There's no argument to it. They shoot great if they're designed properly, or they can, but are they always going to shoot better than steel or as good as steel? And my answer would always be no. I will always say that I think steel barrels, stainless steel barrels, and chrome moly of the same weight will probably outshoot a carbon barrel in most case scenarios, at least on a long test. So let's just talk over the course of thousands of barrels. My guess would be statistically that there would be no comparison as to the potential accuracy that you'll get out of a stainless steel or a chrome moly barrel over a carbon. Not saying that they can't shoot, and you can get them to shoot. And we try to weed out a ton of carbons that we won't build on because we're trying to play the odds in our favor. So there's a reason why we only use IBI barrels, right? But that said, though, even at that, I still would say that a stainless steel IBI barrel is probably going to outshoot the carbon almost every single time. The other benefit of it is the fact that you can do a thin barrel now at 0.7 at the muzzle, 0.750, be within 4 or 5 ounces of the carbon and save $500. I mean, that's just bottom line. You're going to have a rifle that weighs 4 or 5 ounces heavier, in the barrel for sure. But you could take that $500 and upgrade your receiver to something like a Bumblebee or a Vampire, and now you've got a 7-ounce reduction in the receiver. And so you play the balance game. So now, you've got a 22-inch stainless steel barrel that we have to stay at a certain size in stainless. Like, for example, a Krieger won't cut a stainless below a certain diameter. So we like to stay with stainless just so it's sort of more weather resistant. That sort of limits us to how small we can go. You can get really small in chrome moly. So we could build a super thin barrel in chrome moly, but then you run into the issue that you can't put a suppressor, we can't thread it for a muzzle brake, anything like that. It's just too thin, right? So we try to stay with stainless for 2 reasons. It's just going to perform better in the weather. It's going to hold up better. And then two, it gives us some meat on the muzzle that we can actually thread it. Now, we are working, and we've talked about this in the past, on some things in the background here that might alleviate that problem, that we can put things on thinner barrels more appropriately and tighten the muzzle up at the same time. We'll talk about more about that in the future. But when you talk about the stainless steel barrels, number one is, you're going to gain a little bit of ounce in weight. Number two, you're going to dissipate heat a lot better. It's going to absorb and dissipate the heat better because it's got more material to do it. It's going to pull it away from the rifling faster. We use barrel coolers to try to flush heat out, just to sort of double down on that, but there's nothing wrapping it, holding the heat in place. I always say that you're going to have a potential increase in accuracy. The barrel is certainly going to be more rigid. You're going to have a more rigid barrel in that barrel contour. Something like, for example, look at the Lothar Walther, right? There's 2 or 3 barrels we built on with Lothar Walther that are really close to the carbon weight. They save the customer a fair amount of money, and in the end, will always be a better performing barrel. So the third part in my mind would be at least the performance part of it, and the fact that you're going to have that with the combination of more rigidity, less chance of opening up the bore, better heat dissipation, all of these things, less whip, all of these things add up to where if you roll the dice, the odds are always going to be in the favor, I believe, of the steel barrel. So when you're selecting your barrel, if this is a sheep gun and you needed like a IBI Alpine, for example, I get it for sure. But I wouldn't build it in 300 Win Mag and then go out and be goofing around at the range as a range gun all summer long, pounding rounds through it. You're going to really wear the barrel out. It might not even hold up for that round count in maintaining its accuracy. It would be what I would consider a purpose-built gun, and there's no fault in that. You're taking the risk of the rifle might not be the best shooting rifle you've ever owned. It might not be a quarter-minute gun per se, but if it's a half-minute gun and you can knock your sheep down at 300 yards and can carry this thing around in your pack without killing yourself, that's a trade-off you're willing to take, right? The other part is, you just can't shame it for saying they're really nice-looking barrels. I mean, a lot of people, I think, like them just because they're different. They're very sharp. You can tell they're custom, and there's no harm or foul in that either. But that said, if it was a match gun, I would probably opt for never using, in my personal mind, a carbon barrel on a match gun. It would probably be more appropriate for a varmint rifle or for a hunting rifle. And for that, I don't know, I guess maybe the appearance and maybe a little bit less weight reduction. It's just, you're not going to beat it up as much. And the trade-offs if you do run the rifle like you would a normal rifle, that you might wear it out faster and you have all these other things that just might not hold up. So you go and dump 20, 30 rounds to it. Is the accuracy still going to be there? Maybe, maybe not. Is it going to open up a little bit? Or is your point of impact going to shift a little bit? Possibly. These are things that you're sort of vulnerable to. And if you know your rifle well enough, you'll know. For example, I had rifles in the past where we could document 5, 10 rounds years and years ago, keep in mind, with factory guns that they would just walk up the paper. It was sort of amazing to watch. So if you know your rifle and you work with it well enough, you'll know if you have a big problem, or if you just, after you shoot 3 to 5, 7 rounds, I got to let the gun cool down the whole way. I got to let it set for half an hour, something like that. So when a customer calls in and they start asking questions about carbon and stainless, because we always talk about this, one of the things I think that we always take the time is to speak to the customer and always be honest. I have nothing that we want to try to persuade somebody one way or the other that's self-serving. I think that's disingenuous, and I think that's a bad thing. In other words, I wouldn't want to upgrade a customer just because we make more money off of it, right? We'll tell everybody to buy a carbon because we make an extra $50. To me, that is so disingenuous. So I like to tell the customers exactly like I'm telling you here on the podcast is there are some pros and cons to both. It would depend on what the end use is and what your expectations are, is how you decide. If you really just want a really pretty looking gun, it's just going to be something you're going to shoot once in a while. No harm, no foul. I think IBI's got probably one of the best dialed-in carbons that you can buy, and we use them. It's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It makes up the majority of our hunting rifles. But I always throw that out there that, hey, you've got an alternative here, and here are the benefits to it. Collectively, individually, these things might not mean all that much, right? It's not going to be world-shaking in every single category that we talked about, but collectively can make a little bit of a difference. You can spend more time with the rifle at the range practicing. You can take it out and put more rounds through without worrying about it. It may last longer. The point of impact might not walk as quick, or you might not have issues if you overheat it. It's going to cool down faster so you can keep shooting at the range. I always like to weigh that out there. Most of the time I lose the argument and the customer goes with the carbon, and we've built lots of rifles with carbon fiber barrels. They are super fun to shoot. It's probably 80% of our hunting rifles, so I don't want to quote unquote shoot myself in the foot. But I am going to be honest here, and for me personally, I would probably always look to, unless it was something aesthetic that I just wanted a pretty rifle, I would probably still opt for the stainless or chrome moly. I would probably look at the Krieger or the Lothar Walther or something in the IBI line, just for all the reasons that I mentioned above. So if you have any questions with this, or if you want to shoot me over an email, food for thought, please feel free to reach out to us. My email here is contact@wolfprecision, and I'd love to continue this conversation. And we might invite some builders on to do an interview and talk about this more in depth, and maybe we can actually get them to publicly start talking a little bit about some of the things that they found when they were working on it, and the years and years and years it took them to finally get something that would shoot to the expectations that they would want, right? So and that's always a good thing. Before we continue on, I do want to say a quick thank you to one of our sponsors show. It's Krieger Barrels. Krieger is a family-owned and operated barrel maker in Wisconsin. They are world-renowned. They are considered one of the best in the world at what they do. And they offer a new program called Krieger Direct, where you can log on, order your barrel, and have it in as little as 2 to 3 business days. So I always say, if you want the best and you need it now, stop over to KriegerBarrels.com. That's KriegerBarrels.com today. All right, just a couple quick updates. We are taking off and ready to go teach a shooting school in the great state of Florida, then a movers class in Georgia. We still have a couple slots open for Georgia. You can still register online. You can stop over to wolfprecision.net. If you've never attended a movers class before, it is one of the most fun things you can learn to do with a rifle. And a lot of the clients and the students and stuff who have attended the movers class will say it is the most fun they've ever had with their rifle in a class. It is a lot of shooting. It is a lot of fun. A lot of good barbecue. Brunswick stew will be on the menu. I am sure we're going to be sneaking out and eating some good food while we're down there. That is next weekend. So if you'd like to learn more about it, I think we have a couple slots left. You stop over to wolfprecision.net. I'd also want to throw out there that our armors course, online armors course, and our reloading class, we did move those. We did pull them off the Patreon website. So you'll see Patreon. You can attend our online long-range shooting school. That is still there. It's still up and running. I think we have 74 students attending the online course. Thank you for doing that. We really appreciate it. We hope you're getting a lot from it. We have more content still coming up. But we did put the armors course and the reloading class on our website, and we're not going to charge anything for it. Now, there is a catch to this, right? We have to protect ourselves as a business and putting a lot of content out there, because you can't fix stupid, and it seems to find its way everywhere, right? So one of the caveats to the online armors course, as well as the online reloading class, is you have to be one of our customers for a custom rifle. So we're not going to charge for it. We're going to make it a benefit of owning one of our custom rifles. It's not a sales pitch to buy one of our custom rifles. It's us wanting to help the customers that have invested in one of our rifles on how to build it, how to maintain it, how to take care of it. Same thing with the reloading class. We have a couple videos up, but nothing really intense as far as the reloading. But if you buy one of our custom rifles, we want to help you get the most from it, but we have to be careful that we just don't put this stuff all over the internet for everybody and their brother that doesn't have one of our rifles to start goofing around and doing things they're not supposed to be doing, and then we can get in trouble for that. So to protect ourselves, what we're doing is you have to register. So if you are an existing customer of ours and you've purchased one of our custom rifles in the past, we have you archived, of course. What you have to do is go onto our website, and when you click on it, it's going to ask you to register. So you're going to have a login registration email. That comes to us. When the office gets it here, they look you up to make sure that you are one of our customers that have one of our custom rifles. And then they will approve your login. And at that point, you'll have unlimited access to both the reloading class as well as the armors course and gunsmithing school. That's how we're going to do it. And I always thought that, originally we were thinking, we'll just put it on Patreon and we'll put a small fee to it, and, anybody can enjoy it. But at the same time, for a customer that buys one of our custom rifles, I really don't want to make this a money-making thing, or, hey, you bought a rifle, now I'm going to make you pay more to learn how to build it. I don't want to do that. And so I thought, rather than doing it the way that we were planning on with the tier system with Patreon, let's go ahead and make it part of the purchase of the rifle, and let's make it a benefit to those that have purchased one of our custom rifles, that they can go on and enjoy this, and let's make it for free. But let's protect ourselves that we don't have everything going out to the public and thinking that everything that we do when we build our custom rifle applies to every other rifle made. That's not true. And everything that we do in reloading, when we're talking about reloading for one of our custom rifles, yeah, a lot of the fundamentals are the same, but at the same time, we know our rifles, we know everything about them. We can share information in confidence that the processes that you're going to go through making that ammunition for your rifle is going to hold true. But when you start talking about all the different makes and models of rifles out there, someone tries to do what we're doing and they don't know what they're doing, or they're unfamiliar with the rifle they're trying to reload for, and they make a mistake, and then they want to come back and potentially hold us liable for sharing that information with them when it might not have been pertinent to the rifle that they were using. So in some ways, we're really just trying to protect ourselves. And then, of course, you have to be 18 years or older to attend either. And if you've purchased one of our rifles, there's a really good chance you are. So you can stop over to wolfprecision.net if you have one of our custom rifles, and you can register today. You can just log in with an email and password that'll come to us, and we'll approve it. And you can start enjoying it. And if you ever have an interest in one of our Wolf Precision custom rifles or one of our build kits, that also makes you eligible to go on there and see all the great content that we're going to be posting up. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us here on the podcast. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the podcast and you would like to share it, it really helps us a lot in our ratings and being found. And then if you would like to leave us a nice review, we always really appreciate that. That really helps us a lot in our ratings as well. It's really been a great process, and over the last several years, really has made a great difference in our business. And really our intention is just try to share with you the best information we can to get you the most out of you and your shooting and your rifle. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us here. My name is Jamie Dotson. I am your host, and you're listening to Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.